Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal, Dahiya, and today we will take a look at the monsoon session which concluded after 17 sittings. The monsoon session of the Parliament concluded on Friday with 17 sittings of both houses in which members debated and passed several key bills and discussed some important issues as well. One of the highlights of the session in Lok Sabha was the no confidence motion against the NDA government, which it won by a huge margin, and the election of deputy chairman in Rajya Sabha, which also saw NDA nominee emerging as victorious. In terms of productivity, the monsoon session fared much better than the budget session this year, which had seen repeated disruptions. While the productivity of Lok Sabha stood at around 106% for the upper house, that is Rajya Sabha, this figure was approximately 68%. Both houses spent a significant amount of time in taking up the legislative business. While in Lok Sabha, this figure was approximately 48% of the total time. In Rajya Sabha, it was around 44%. 21 bills were cleared by Lok Sabha and more than a dozen by the Rajya Sabha in this session. So let's take a look at the highlights and takeaways of this session, that is the monsoon session of Parliament, and how it all progressed through the 24 days since the House was in session. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests. Let me start by introducing them to you, beginning with Mr. Shekhar, Iyer, senior journalist who is with us here in the studio. Also joining us is another senior journalist, Ms. Neerja Chowdhury, and with us for the analytical part of it all in terms of figures is Mr. Chakshu, the head of the Legislative and Civic Engagement Initiatives from PRS. Let me begin with you, Mr. Iyer, and straight away, was this a productive and a good session? Because this is how it seems to be turning out in terms of numbers, if you look at the number of bills passed, and if you do a small comparative analysis between the budget session and the monsoon session.
Well, indeed, it was a very, very fruitful session. I would say it's a fruitful session both for the government as well as for the opposition. After a long haul, opposition managed to get a no confidence motion moved in the Lok Sabha. And at the same time, there were other significant developments like the election of the deputy chairman in the Rajya Sabha and the legislations, the number of legislation. I would look at this particular session had a lot of focus on social justice aspect of our lawmaking, because you had the SC/ST Atrocities Act Amendment Bill, which had to come because there was near consensus on tackling a situation caused by the Supreme Court's observations as to preventive arrests, as to inquiry being, any inquiry on a complaint made by a Dalit or tribal undergoing a preliminary check. So all that's one thing. And the third thing was the constitutional status to the Backward Class Commission. This is something that has been pending for a long time,
exactly,
almost for a year, and that's equally as important thing. And had triple talaq been taken up, I think it would have been a session that saw three important legislation when it comes to empowerment.
But you rightly pointed out, Mr. Iyer, that from the social justice perspective, this was an important one. Let's bring in Ms. Neerja here. Ms. Neerja, as Shekhar is pointing out, in terms of social justice, be it the SC/ST bill or 123rd Constitutional Amendment Bill, which in the previous session, it looked like, that it might end up in a limbo because there were certain, objections which the opposition had. But it has finally seen the light of the day. It has been cleared by both houses. So it looks like both sides had their say. And finally, both these bills in terms of social justice were cleared.
I think you're right. We must remember we are now in election mode. Come the end of this session, we are going to be facing three very important assembly sessions. Few months down the line, general election next year. Of course, there's the winter session to come. But certainly, the giving statutory status to the OBC Commission, which has been pending for some time, is a very important, and Congress also supported this. It's a very important bill. And I think you see, because in different states now, for instance, Maratha agitation is going on in Maharashtra. The Patidar agitation was there in Gujarat before the elections, and that was a sore point. And so also the Jats, and these things you can expect will flare up again. So what the government has done is not only to have strengthened and made this into a constitutional commission which will take all decisions related to who is an OBC and who's not. there is this, we were just talking, there's this committee that's been sent up. So every Marathas want OBC status, it will go now to the committee. From a committee, it will be the commission that takes the decision. Okay. So the government is free of it all.
So the process has been streamlined, basically.
It's been streamlined, but politically also, it's advantage to the government because they don't have to take controversial, difficult, tough decisions which are hot potatoes.
Okay.
So, and they've given the signal to the OBCs, yes, we are with you. They have given the signals to the Dalits because the Dalits were in uproar after the Supreme Court's observations on this amendment bill. And so they've restored the status quo ante, but given even more teeth to the bill, which has made the Dalits across the board happy.
Okay. So we'll look at the political aspect of what all happened in Parliament as well. But as of now, let's bring in Mr. Roy here to look at the analytical part of it. And Mr. Roy, you know, apart from the data and the figures, one very important fact which everybody looks up to is how many of the key pending legislations were taken up by the Parliament and were cleared. In this session, it looked like that, you know, there were a number of them, and all of them were almost key legislations which were either pending in Lok Sabha or in Rajya Sabha, and most of them have seen the light of the day. So how do you look at this session in terms of, you know, clearing the backlog from the previous sessions?
I think a key aspect of this session, which you mentioned early on in your statement, was the amount of time that the both houses spent on legislative business. And if I do a rough kind of approximation, 50%, almost 50% of the time spent both in Lok Sabha and in Rajya Sabha was on legislative business, and that's almost the highest that I can see in the last 10-12 years. In fact, from 2000, or at least in the 16th Lok Sabha, I haven't seen a session with such high focus on legislation. Now, the panel, was also mentioning as to the amount of focus that Parliament had on social legislation. But Parliament also had an equal amount of focus on the financial aspects of legislation. So there was a fugitive economic bill, there were bills related to amending the reverse charge on GST.
Prevention of Corruption Amendment Act.
There was prevention of corruption. Today, the Bankruptcy Code Amendment is passed by Rajya Sabha. Commercial Codes has been passed by Rajya Sabha. So I think the focus, if you look in terms of legislation, was all across. There are some bills which are still pending. One of the bills for which cabinet, amendments came out only recently was the Triple Talaq bill. So hopefully that's going to come out later. The motor vehicles bill, there is consensus still to be built around it. The bill to overhaul the Consumer Protection Act is also currently pending in the House. There was some key legislation which was introduced during the session. So the one on human rights, the one on DNA technology. So hopefully those bills will come in the winter session. What I wanted to close by saying was that for all of us who watch Parliament very closely, this was a well-rounded session. You saw a fair bit of legislative business. You saw the government being put into check by the no confidence motion. You saw the election to a constitutional position for Rajya Sabha. So every aspect that you want to see in a parliamentary deliberation was on exhibit in these 17 days.
Okay, so it was a fair mix, as Chakshu is pointing out. But let's bring in Shekhar again here. And Shekhar, if you move from the legislative agenda or the legislative business to other things which happened in the House, the two more important things which took place, as has been pointed out by all of you, one is the no confidence motion. The question here is that as far as no confidence motion is concerned, what was it that the opposition was trying to gain? Because the numbers were pretty much in the government's favor. And, this is a demand which was there in the previous session as well, which was going on for some time. So is it just because, as Neerja was pointing out, that this is an election year, so there was some posturing which has to be done from the political parties' point of view? That is why it happened. But we did saw a very engaging debate on this no confidence motion.
Yeah, indeed, it was a very, very engaging debate. I think there were 2-3 dimensions to that no confidence motion. Because the system we have in Parliament is the parties give notice for moving a no confidence motion, and there is a lot through which it's picked. And this time it was TDP, because TDP's whole, the thrust of the no confidence motion was on what it considered as injustice being done to Andhra Pradesh on the issue of granting it a special category status. So the TDP initiated the debate focusing on that the problems of Andhra Pradesh following the bifurcation of the greater Andhra Pradesh, which became Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Now the focus was on that. So consequently, being the thrust of the issues, we saw the other parties, I mean the parties which are not with NDA. So parties like Telugu Rashtra Samiti or a party like say Biju Janata Dal. So Biju Janata Dal walked out of the house saying that this is not an issue which. So I think I see a pattern in the election of deputy chairman and in the way the no confidence motion went through in the Lok Sabha. So there were 2-3 messages that was coming out, which is that allies of the BJP, no matter whatever they have misgivings over the relationship with the BJP, they are not going to part with BJP, at least until the next elections. Okay. That's one big message. The second message is the undecided parties who are not in the NDA and who are seen as part of the opposition, they can go with BJP if a situation so arises where they see a greater benefit, their political benefit. So that we saw in the election of a Janata Dal United member, Harivansh Narayan Singh, as a deputy chairman. That's it. And the third thing, I think, much more, though the opposition is making several efforts to project a very united common stand, I think in terms of executing the strategy, a lot more needs to be done. Because the grand spectacle we saw in Bengaluru when Kumaraswamy was sworn in, that was, all of them holding their hands together. That was supposed to send a strong signal. Subsequent to that, see, here in the case of a deputy chairman's election, the opposition had the numbers. But the way the strategy played out, we saw an NDA nominee winning.
Okay.
So there is that message that perhaps, particularly the Congress needs to do more, because after the deputy chairman's election, we saw a party like Aam Aadmi Party saying that nobody spoke to us. Rahul Gandhi could have spoken to us. Okay. So there is something she is seen to be wanting in terms of Congress-led opposition strategy.
So what you're saying actually is that the political posturing or political perceptions which are created do not seemingly executed well in terms of floor strategy when it comes to Parliament as well. Let's bring in Neerja here. Neerja, adding to what Shekhar was pointing out in terms of what happened in the upper house as well, there were several firsts. One of them has been mentioned by Shekhar, that a deputy chairman. The election, it was the first time a member, and that too from JDU. This time around, neither the Congress member nor the BJP, the two major parties, went on to occupy that particular position. The second was we also saw a women member for the first time, and that too a first time MP, chairing the question hour as well. Kehkashan Parveen was given the chance as member of the chairman's panel, and so on and so forth, several as well. So it was indeed several firsts in Rajya Sabha as well, despite the fact that when you look at the figures, there might be something short there, but there were several things very interesting to notice when it comes to upper house.
The election of the deputy chairperson should have been a very routine affair, but it wasn't, because everybody is watching it to see what are the alignments that has come through this process which will have relevance for 2019. So the BJP showed we can keep our allies with us, including the Shiv Sena, except the TDP is already gone to the other side. That was the gain of the opposition. And we can win over potential allies, those who are non-aligned so far. So the BJD and the TRS, Telangana Rashtra Samiti, came to their side, which tipped the scales in their favor. So the BJP, which was very nervous earlier on, and the election had been postponed, and everybody wondered whether they'll have it in this session at all, got its act together. As I keep saying, the BJP shows a killer instinct, a management skill that the other side. I agree with Shekhar that it was the absence of adequate timely management on the other side, and actually what it showed up is that when it comes to decisions like this, the opposition may mean well and want to get together, but there is simply nobody in charge who says, okay, announce, election announce, things are not moving ahead. Let's get people together. Now what? Now what? Now what? You know, that process was not.
So step-by-step process was not there.
And I think at the end of the day, the opposition really lacks that, what we call the killer instinct, that we've got to win every election like the BJP has. And the BJP has a formidable machinery which comes into play, whichever the election, whether it's deputy chairperson, local elections, state elections, national election. So that is another thing. And in the process, the BJP is given a signal. It's stooped to conquer, even though it had the larger numbers. It gave this position to the Janata Dal U, which was flexing its muscles. There has to be a Bihar arrangement with them for 2019. And it gave this message to all the allies, existing, potential. We are going to take your concerns on board.
Okay.
So I think it's a change of strategy by the BJP we saw in this session of Parliament.
Okay. Chakshu, since in your first response, you said that, you know, it was a great mix of how we saw the legislative agenda being taken up, issues being taken up, and, you know, several other things as well, be it the no confidence motion or the election of deputy chairman. But in terms of, you know, the way both our other panelists are pointing out that everything in this session, apart from the legislative agenda, or maybe sometimes in the legislative agenda as well, the kind of key bills which were passed, looked like pointing towards the future strategy which will be employed or deployed by both the government and the opposition as well.
So, you know, if I look at the session currently, when I look at it, what appears to me is that both the Treasury benches and the opposition benches have come together for some kind of a bipartisan arrangement when it comes to discussion on things. And that was evident, right? There was a fair bit of debate on the issue of social media and its impact on things. That happened in the upper house. There was a debate on agricultural issues which happened in the lower house. There were contentious issues which were discussed. There were regular issues, you know, so the issue of floods was also discussed. Let's also not forget that Parliament has other responsibilities. You know, the members of Parliament were keeping you know, the government in check during question hour. And you saw a lot of wit and repartee also happen, you know, on one occasion when the Prime Minister was in the House and somebody said that, you know, will he answer the question as long as I respectfully stand from a distance and ask it. So question hour, you know, was fairly productive. In fact, the 16th Lok Sabha, the number of private member bills that have been introduced is about to cross 1,000 private member bills.
Okay.
And that's way more than what we've seen in previous Lok Sabhas. So just the initiative of individual members across party lines in participating in parliamentary proceedings is also exemplary.
But I'll butt in here one thing. You know, with this 1,000 you know, private members bills and these other important things happening, would you also connect it with in some way that there are several new MPs, not only in Lok Sabha but in Rajya Sabha as well, first-time MPs. So they have that zeal to go ahead and involve themselves in the entire process, go ahead and speak on issues and maybe introduce private members bills as well, or ask questions.
Absolutely, and I think on a number of occasions the chair has been fairly open to the idea of having backbenchers speak. So you would have seen a number of, so when the camera pans, you see the back of the house and, you know, people participating from there, and which is a great thing. I think it's a great thing for parliamentary democracy that not only the front benches but also the back benches are participating. I just you know, with the way the session was progressing, I just wish the session was longer. So we could have seen some more discussion happen on the floor.
There was talk whether it should be extended to Monday to take up the triple talaq bill.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Okay, so clearly, Shekhar, coming back to the overall perception which this session has, and if we, you know, do a comparative analysis as we've been doing since last 15-20 minutes, you know, be it you compare with the previous monsoon session or you compare it to the preceding session, which is budget. Now that there is a sort of a momentum which is there, you know, bills being taken up, discussions being happening on several issues, and questions being asked, new members as well joining in and speaking up. How do you see this entire build-up translating into the next one, which is not too far away, the winter session specifically, which might eventually end being the final session in this term of the NDA government?
Yeah, you see, there is a lot of wisdom dawning on all sides that it doesn't pay to keep the house in disruption. I mean, we saw it during monsoon session. I mean, even during budget session, there was because a lot of work was done in budget session. And subsequently, but apart from the passage of the budget, there was a lot of disruption. Similarly,
specifically in the second half, there was
was a lot of problems. Now, as far as monsoon session is concerned, the very fact that the government, accepted the demand for a no confidence motion took the opposition by surprise, because opposition was actually gearing for a replay of the previous session, but that didn't happen. And the other thing, which is, I think, the enduring images of monsoon session would be particularly the nature of the debate, the no confidence debate, because that also saw the Congress President Rahul Gandhi in one of his most combative best, as far as the way the Congress cadres would consider, and equally forceful was Prime Minister's reply. And not to forget that hug that Rahul gave the Prime Minister, and that wink, which went viral on social media. So these are the colors of a parliamentary, I would say, practices, because there is a lot of energy and there is a lot of but what would serve everyone's cause is to have good, intelligent, debates, because that is where I think our, the parliament can come alive, our tradition can come alive, because at the end of the day, it is not shouting down your opponent is going to help anyone, because there are a lot of issues where the country wants to hear, various views being put on the floor of the House, and it is opposition duty to seek questions from the government, and the government would also like to be heard, because what the general complaint has been, opposition raises the issue, they shout and then they scoot and they don't let us give the reply. I think we need to allow a situation where the opposition gets its fullest opportunity to have its say, and also allows the government to give its reply. And I think if this healthy thing can be somehow revived before we face the 2019 elections, we could be seeing a much livelier parliament in the years to come.
Okay, let's hope so, and let's bring Neerja on this note. Neerja, as you pointed out, and as Shekhar also pointed out earlier, apart from giving us a peep into what the political party's strategy might be for the coming elections, maybe state or even Lok Sabha 2019, both the treasury as well as the opposition, has this session been able to go ahead and build that momentum which can be carried into the next one, that is the winter session? Because we've seen how things change between two different sessions, The intermediate period, we will have a lot more political issues coming up, a lot more other issues as well. But, this sort of work and this sort of effort which has been put in, can this be carried on into the next session as well? Or will it work sort of a bouncing board upon that?
It could. But just to, add to what Shekhar said before I go on to what you're asking, it's very interesting that the no confidence motion is being seen as a victory by both sides. I had one of the BJP ministers say today, the no confidence motion gave us an opportunity to reach out to the country, which we would have otherwise taken 6 months to do. In a normal course. So this gave us a great opportunity, and the opposition feels, we put the government on the mat. Our Congress president really gave it was a blistering speech and followed by the chappi. So both sides, it was a win-win. That is a marvelous thing of what happened. But yes, the momentum, I can see the BJP going to town on what they're doing for the OBCs, for the SCs. They are worried about the disquiet amongst the Dalit sections, farmers. So certainly you will see a momentum getting built. Now they're talking about the triple talaq coming in the winter session of Parliament. But certainly the government side and the opposition side are going to calibrate their strategy and the issues they raise week by week, month by month, leading up to this great big battle of 2019.
Okay, clearly, our last few seconds, and Chakshu, your concluding comments on the same issue. Has the momentum built, not only for the elections, but also for the entire parliamentary discourse, which has come back on track now?
Yes, it is built. The 16th Lok Sabha is going to come to an end. We have one session left. There are a number of key legislation pending. The government ideally would want to possibly go into the general election by conducting as much legislative business as it can. I just hope that there's way more scrutiny of legislation, not only inside the House, but also in the parliamentary committee system. So yes, that momentum hopefully will carry forward for both sides into the winter session.
Okay, so clearly, as our panelists are pointing out, that this particular session has concluded well with a number of legislative business being taken up, key bills being passed, issues being discussed, and This has ended up in being a win-win situation for both the Parliament and the people of the country. We'll come back again with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha television.